What if the most important military operation of this decade happened in broad daylight, was reported by every major news channel, and almost every single person who watched it completely misunderstood what they were seeing? On June 9, 2026, something happened in the waters near southern Iran. A decision was made, a trigger was pulled, and a set of targets was chosen. And those targets, more than anything else said or reported that day, told a story that the headlines refused to tell. A story about power, vision, and a strait of water so critical that whoever controls it effectively controls the pulse of the global economy. Before we go any further, if this kind of deep analysis is what you came here for, hit that like button right now. Not because it helps the algorithm, though it does, but because it's the only signal I have that you want more of this. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and share this with one person who you think deserves to understand what's actually happening in the world right now. Okay, now let's get into it. Here's how the story was told to you. On June 9th, the United States military announced it had conducted strikes on nearly 20 military targets inside southern Iran. The official reason given was self-defense. An American Apache helicopter had gone down after a mid-air collision with an Iranian drone over the Strait of Hormuz. The networks framed it cleanly. Iran provoked. America responded. Some called it proportional. Some called it restrained. Some called it overdue. And then everyone moved on to debating whether Trump was right or wrong. But here's the thing nobody paused to ask. When you look at the actual list of what was destroyed, something doesn't add up. Not even a little. The targets were not drone storage sites. They were not the launch pads used to fire the Shahed that hit the Apache. They were not weapons depots, not missile stockpiles, not the infrastructure directly connected to the helicopter incident at all. The targets were radar stations, coastal surveillance networks, ground control centers, air defense systems, all of them positioned along the southern Iranian coastline, every single one facing outward toward the same body of water, the Strait of Hormuz. So let's ask the obvious question. If someone attacks you with their fist, where do you hit back? The fist. Maybe the arm. Maybe the body. You don't hit their eyes. You only hit their eyes if your real goal isn't to hurt them. Your real goal is to blind them. And that is exactly what happened on June 9th. America didn't strike back at Iran's weapon. America struck at Iran's vision. And understanding why that distinction matters is the entire point of this video. Let's start with geography, because it shapes everything else. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water, roughly 33 kilometers at its tightest point. It's so narrow that competitive swimmers have crossed it. And yet through that thin sliver of ocean, approximately 20% of the entire world's crude oil supply passes every single day. Japan depends on this region for about 3/4 of its oil imports. China, roughly 40%. India, around 60%. The Japanese Prime Minister stated publicly that if the strait ever closed, Japan's economy would face collapse within 8 to 9 months. That is not a geopolitical hypothetical. That is the architecture of the modern world resting on a strip of water you could cross in a helicopter in under 4 minutes. Now here is what most coverage never explained properly. In the months leading up to June 9th, Iran had been building something extraordinary along this coastline. Not just the ability to threaten the strait, the ability to see it, completely, in real time. Every ship, every tanker, every military vessel, every cargo load moving through that water was visible to Iran's coastal intelligence network. Radar installations on key islands, ground-based surveillance stations at strategic coastal positions, integrated systems pulling real-time data into centralized command centers. Together, these facilities gave Iran something worth far more than military hardware. They gave Iran information dominance over the most economically important waterway on the planet. And with that information dominance came capability. Iran could identify and track every vessel transiting the strait. It could coordinate its naval units to intercept, shadow, or board vessels as it chose. And according to multiple sources, it was doing something else entirely. Something that sounds almost impossible until you realize how much leverage the strait provides. Iran was reportedly charging commercial ships for passage, not officially, not through declared customs, but through a quiet, enforced toll system. Somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million US per voyage, paid in cargo, sometimes in cryptocurrency, for ships that wanted to pass through without incident. Think about what that represents. A country under one of the most severe economic blockades in modern history, cut off from international financial systems, oil revenues suppressed, and yet sitting at the single most important intersection in the global energy supply chain, with the eyes to see everything and the reach to enforce anything. That's not just financial survival, that's strategic leverage of an almost breathtaking scale. But more important than the money was what this network meant at the negotiating table. Because there were negotiations happening. Quietly, carefully, with enormous stakes. And the central sticking point was control of passage through the strait. America was demanding free and unrestricted commercial navigation. Iran was insisting on its right to manage and oversee traffic through what it considered its strategic domain. Iranian state media had openly called this their trump card. As long as they physically controlled what happened in that water, no external power could force them into any deal they did not choose to accept. Now look at the target list again. Coastal radar, surveillance stations, ground control centers, air defense networks. America was not retaliating for a helicopter. America was trying to take away Iran's ability to see the strait, because without sight, Iran loses control. Without control of the strait, Iran loses its leverage. Without leverage, Iran can no longer hold out at the negotiating table. The entire operation was a strategic attempt to remove Iran's most powerful bargaining chip before the deal was finalized. The Apache helicopter, both pilots of which were safely rescued within 2 hours by an unmanned surface vessel, was not the cause of the strikes. It was the justification, the legal and political cover for an operation that had likely been planned long before the collision ever happened. And here's what makes this even more striking. Iran figured it out immediately. Not in retrospect, not after days of analysis, in the hours following the American strikes. Iran's foreign ministry released a statement describing the targeted facilities as structures that existed to, and this is important, protect the country's border security and ensure maritime safety on international waterways. That is diplomatic language with a very specific message underneath it. The message was, we know exactly what you were trying to do. You were trying to blind us, and we know why. Iran didn't just understand the operation, they had already decided how to respond. In the early morning hours of June 10th, less than 24 hours after the American strikes, Iran launched a coordinated assault on 21 American and allied military targets across 3 countries simultaneously: Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan. Ballistic missiles and drones, all firing at once, targeting bases with what Iranian military sources later claimed was 70% accuracy, based on satellite imagery and field intelligence. That is not the response of a country that was damaged. That is not the behavior of a military that had its command infrastructure degraded. That is precision. That is readiness. That is confidence. And the question you have to sit with is this: where did that confidence come from? A country under economic blockade, absorbing American airstrikes, choosing to respond at that scale? That level of calculation doesn't come from desperation. It comes from knowing that you are not alone. To understand that, you have to look away from the Gulf entirely. Because the answer was happening simultaneously on the other side of the world. On June 8, 2026, one day before the Apache helicopter went down, Chinese President Xi Jinping landed in Pyongyang, North Korea. Kim Jong-un greeted him personally in a ceremony of rare formality. Military music, thousands of people, a state reception that signaled this was not a casual visit. In the official talks that followed, both sides discussed what the joint statement described as deepening cooperation across diplomacy, law enforcement, and military affairs. Every major news network treated this as a separate story, a routine diplomatic moment, something to note and move past. That was a profound mistake. Because when you connect the two events, the state visit in Pyongyang and the exchange of fire in the Gulf of Oman, you stop seeing 2 separate news stories. You start seeing a single coordinated architecture. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Not an informal alignment of shared grievances. A structured bloc designed to stretch American attention, resources, and credibility across multiple theaters at the same time. Western defense analysts had already been describing this formation in serious reports, a synchronized pressure system targeting American global leadership. And Xi Jinping's arrival in Pyongyang on June 8th was not coincidental. It was a signal. Not primarily to Kim Jong-un, primarily to Tehran. The message was direct. You are not alone. We are watching. Do what you need to do. And the support behind that message was not symbolic. It was material. China had allegedly been supplying Iran with man-portable air defense systems. Chinese components reportedly made their way into Iran's radar infrastructure. And most critically, Iran is said to have acquired a high-resolution Chinese reconnaissance satellite. A satellite that had been quietly observing American military installations at the exact bases Iran then targeted on the morning of June 10th. Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan. Iran didn't fire blindly. Iran fired at targets it had been watching from space, targets its Chinese intelligence tools had mapped in detail. That's why the strikes were coordinated. That's why they hit multiple countries simultaneously. That's why the accuracy was claimed at 70%. Iran went into that response with better intelligence about American base layouts than most people understand. And at the United Nations, Russia and China were blocking every legal mechanism the West was attempting to use. Resolutions to condemn Iran's maritime conduct, proposals to establish international naval protection for commercial shipping in the Strait, attempts to trigger the snapback mechanism to reimpose nuclear sanctions. All vetoed, all nullified. Russia and China argued the legal mechanisms themselves were invalid. They created what you might call a rules vacuum, a legal gray zone where Iran could operate without institutional consequence. Now this matters more than it might seem on the surface, because for months before June 9th, America and its European allies had been trying to contain Iran the way modern powers are supposed to contain each other, not through direct military confrontation, through institutions, through international law, through the architecture of sanctions and resolutions and multilateral pressure. This approach, sometimes called institutional balancing, is built on the theory that in a world with nuclear weapons and deep economic interdependence, powerful countries trap each other through rules rather than through violence. But every rule in that playbook was blocked. Every legal move was vetoed. The referee had been removed from the field. And when there are no rules, when the institutional framework collapses completely, the choices left are narrower. You either absorb the loss or you pick up a weapon. June 9th was the moment that collapse became audible. And yet, here is the detail that doesn't fit the clean war narrative. Even as missiles were being launched and radar towers were burning, both sides were still talking. Trump told journalists a deal could arrive in days. A senior White House official described the negotiations as still close, still ongoing, unaffected by the military exchanges. Two countries firing at each other and simultaneously assuring the world that diplomacy was proceeding normally. What does that actually mean? It means neither side believes they can win this through force. The strikes are not being used to defeat the other party. They are being used to reshape what the other party will accept at the table. The military action is itself a form of negotiation, a way of moving the goalposts not with arguments but with aircraft. Force being used not as an end, but as a bargaining instrument, which is actually more dangerous than conventional war, because there is no clean definition of when it stops. Now let's take a moment here because I want to be genuinely fair to the American position rather than just present one side of this analysis. Here is the strongest version of the case for what America did on June 9th. A U.S. military aircraft was lost. Regardless of whether the collision with the Iranian drone was deliberate or accidental, allowing it to pass without response sends a message to every American ally in the region that American military presence can be challenged without consequence. The targets selected, coastal radar, surveillance networks, air defense systems, were the exact tools Iran had been using for months to harass and extort commercial shipping. Striking them was a legitimate assertion of freedom of navigation in international waters. It was calibrated, limited, and deliberately designed not to rupture the ongoing peace process. That argument has internal logic, it has precedent, it makes strategic sense on its own terms, but it runs into a problem it cannot solve. Before ordering the strikes, Trump himself described the helicopter incident as not a big deal, specifically because both pilots had been safely recovered. He had to be persuaded by his defense secretary and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs that a military response was necessary despite his initial instinct to downplay it. So if this was a genuine defensive necessity, why did the president's first instinct contradict that framing? And if it was a pre-planned strategic operation to degrade Iran's maritime surveillance capacity, why wait for a helicopter accident to execute it? Unless the answer is that the accident wasn't the reason. The accident was the opportunity. And there's one more piece that the defensive framing simply cannot explain. If you were retaliating specifically for a drone that struck your helicopter, the proportional response is to hit the drone infrastructure, the launch sites, the storage facilities, the assembly lines. You do not hit radar stations in response to a drone strike. You hit radar stations when your goal is something else entirely. When your goal is to remove an adversary's ability to see a critical waterway. You don't hit the weapon that hurt you, you hit the eyes that guide all their weapons. That is what America hit. And the reason it matters is not just strategic. It's because Iran read it perfectly. They understood what was being taken from them and why. and they responded accordingly with speed and precision that proved the operation had not achieved its intended effect. Here is what the American strikes on June 9th actually accomplished, according to the evidence. Iranian military spokespeople stated the same day that their forces were at maximum readiness and that damages had been repaired. State media confirmed explosions in multiple locations but reported no critical infrastructure destroyed, no command systems taken offline, no strategic facilities lost. 2 soldiers died in that period, but in an Israeli operation the previous day, not the American one. And then, hours later, Iran launched the most coordinated retaliatory strike in the entire conflict. 21 targets, 3 countries, 1 night. If the American operation had genuinely degraded Iran's military capacity, that response would have been physically impossible. A former director of the Iran branch of Israeli military intelligence put it plainly. Iran came out of this exchange with a stronger belief that it could absorb external pressure and answer it. That is exactly the opposite of what deterrence is supposed to produce. America wanted Iran frightened. Iran came out of June 9th more assured of its own resilience than before. And the Gulf states, the countries that declared neutrality, that positioned themselves carefully between competing pressures, they are now living with consequences they cannot fully control. Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan were targeted on June 10th not because Iran was angry at them personally, but because they host American military infrastructure. Because their airspace was used, either by American or Israeli aircraft, in operations against Iran. Iran's foreign ministry had warned them explicitly beforehand. If you allow your territory to be used against us, you bear responsibility for what follows. These countries gave up a portion of their sovereignty for security guarantees. And the tragic mechanics of that arrangement is that hosting a powerful patron's military bases makes you a target in the patron's conflicts, whether you chose those conflicts or not. The Gulf states are now experiencing exactly that dynamic. Countries that import 80% of their food, countries whose water supply depends on desalination infrastructure that a drone costing $50,000 can destroy. Countries whose entire economic identity as neutral commercial hubs is built on the assumption of stability. All of that is now under pressure from a war they never formally entered. So let's bring everything together. America used the helicopter collision as legal cover for a strategic operation aimed at dismantling Iran's maritime intelligence network, the coastal radar and surveillance systems that gave Iran real-time visibility over the Strait of Hormuz. By destroying those systems, the goal was to remove Iran's ability to enforce passage payments, to coordinate naval interceptions, and most critically, to remove Iran's most powerful negotiating asset before the peace talks reached their final stage. Iran recognized this immediately, not because they were told, because the target list made it obvious. And Iran was prepared to respond with a scale and precision that would have been impossible without external support. Support that was visibly being renewed and consolidated in Pyongyang on June 8th. Support in the form of satellite intelligence, diplomatic cover at the United Nations, and a broader strategic alignment between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, designed to sustain pressure on American interests across multiple regions simultaneously. The American operation caused minimal lasting damage. Iran's military capacity was not meaningfully degraded. Iran emerged from the exchange more confident in its own position, not less. The Gulf states are caught in consequences they cannot control. The international institutional framework has effectively collapsed, and both sides are still describing the peace deal as close. Which brings us to the question that should be staying with you. 3 things to watch in the days ahead. First, watch whether Iran's coastal surveillance network comes back online. Their officials claimed repairs were completed the same day. If commercial shipping starts reporting incidents in the Strait again, if tankers start experiencing the same coordinated harassment that preceded June 9th, then the American operation did not achieve its primary objective. The shipping data will tell you the truth that official statements won't. Second, watch Saudi Arabia. Riyadh is positioned between 2 forces pulling in opposite directions. Iran is signaling that any country hosting American forces is a participant in the conflict. America needs Saudi cooperation to maintain its naval pressure on Iran. If Saudi Arabia begins limiting American aircraft access or opens direct diplomatic back channels to Tehran without coordinating with Washington, the American alliance network in the Gulf is fracturing. And if that network fractures, the consequences extend far beyond the region. The entire financial architecture that ties the global oil trade to the American dollar rests on stable Gulf cooperation. That is not a regional problem. That is a foundational global one. Third, watch the specific language Trump uses about the deal. Right now, the word is close, talks ongoing, progress continuing. The moment that language shifts from close to pressure, from negotiations to maximum force, that is the signal that the diplomatic track has ended, and the military track is no longer a message, it is the strategy. That shift in language will be the most important news story of the next several weeks if it happens. Don't miss it. Now here is the question I want to leave you with, because I've been sitting with it since this all began, and I don't think anyone is framing it quite this way. If America destroyed Iran's entire coastal radar and surveillance network, the infrastructure that gave Iran its eyes over the strait, and Iran was still able to launch a coordinated, precise, simultaneous attack on 21 targets across 3 countries within hours of those strikes happening, then what is actually controlling the Strait of Hormuz right now? Is it hardware? Radar systems and surveillance stations and ground control centers? Because those can be bombed, those can be replaced, those can be upgraded and rebuilt and moved underground. Or is it something else? Is it the resolve of people who have decided, for reasons that go deeper than any military calculation, that they will not stop? That no matter what is destroyed, no matter what pressure is applied, the will to contest that strait will remain. Because if it's the second thing, if will is the controlling factor and not equipment, then no airstrike resolves anything. You can eliminate every radar tower on the Iranian coast. The strait remains contested. The humans behind the radar are still there, and they are not afraid. That's the fatal flaw in the plan. You can blind someone temporarily. You cannot remove their will to see. Think about that.